Everyone, this is Dr. Emily Scherning with American Resiliency here with an up-to-date climate outlook for all of our friends in Alabama. You have some challenges ahead in this state to be sure, but also some of the most interesting opportunities that I've seen in the entire nation. Well, you're definitely going to be impacted by sea level rise. You're also like the only state I've seen that's going to be gaining usable coastline, stable coastline. It actually looks kind of cool. I was so interested by what I saw that I went down to the Gulf to check it out, and I'll be releasing another video about that in the near future. My family had great experiences in Alabama and Mississippi this spring. I want to give you a little background for this update, though. When I founded American Resiliency in 2021 and started making these climate outlooks, I called them 2050 climate forecasts. Back then, it seemed reasonable to think that we'd be hitting 2°C on average above pre-industrial temperatures at mid-century, and that was the consensus science. But that was then. 2023, as you know from having lived it, was a very serious year in climate. And I'm sure that folks in Alabama are aware of how terrible things were in Louisiana in 2023, a real heartbreaker in terms of climate. You can tell on this figure from the Copernicus Institute, which is the EU outfit. That's their climate people. It's a high value source. That 2023, things got really weird. You can see that we hit 2°C a couple of days at the end of 23, and in February of 24, we were at 2°C again during that really warm February. March isn't on this figure, but according to their monthly bulletin, the average temperature for March was 1.68, so still uncomfortably high. So that information, it really forces us to change our thinking as we take in new information. This outlook, it's a 2°C outlook. As far as the timeline goes, it appears we're going to find that out, but I want you to be able to understand what's coming for when it does get here. Let's check out the challenge level for Alabama at 2°C. So that you can find my source material and follow along, this forecast is based on the National Climate Assessment. This was just updated in November of 23, and there have been significant changes in the projections in this new edition. So I'm updating all of these outlooks. If I use figures, you can get to them by going into chapters and hitting all figures. That'll bring all of them up and they're downloadable. Sometimes I use information in the NCA Climate Atlas. For this, you'll need to open climate maps to follow along. Or if you want to have the information at a glance, using the atlas can take time and it requires populating multiple levels of data. If you'd like a smoother at a glance experience, I'd love to recommend this tool that our volunteer Dustin has made for American Resiliency, where you'll be able to simply pan over a map and look at a number of climate factors at your county level very easily. We use the Fifth National Climate Assessment as a major source of data because it represents the highest consensus climate science available. Your tax dollars paid for the development and review of this document, and you deserve access to the information. However, as a matter of congressional mandate, there's no direct federal funding for communication to the public about the National Climate Assessment. This made me so mad I founded American Resiliency. It's the only nonprofit focused on communicating this important information to the public. We run on your donations. Let's start off with some national overview information here at figure 1.14, where we can see that Alabama is mostly in this lower change band here for projected national changes at 2°C. That means you're looking at just like a 3 to a 5 degree total increase in warming up at the northern part of the state. But for those of us who love this region, you may agree, even 3 degrees hotter is maybe hotter than we need it to be. Let's go over to figure 2.11 and see how this warming is projected to fall around the year. Here we are in figure 2.11. You can see this is big. We're going to break it down for you, of course. But looking just at a glance, I'm seeing some real challenges, particularly here. I zoom in right on this hot spot here for an increase in warm nights, nights over 70. Let's look deeper into how summer heat is going to change in Alabama first. This dark spot here represents about 50 additional nights a year over 70, where it's not going to cool down at night. And all the state where we're in the red, we're talking about a month of additional nights over 70. This is going to have impacts on agriculture. This is going to have impacts on corn and soy yields and might indicate a need to shift towards more hot weather crops like sorghum, like millet, crops that continue to fill grain really well in a hot night environment. Right around here is where we saw that nighttime warming hotspot by Montgomery County and Bullock County, where as well as those 50 warm nights, you're looking at a nearly biblical almost 40 additional days over 95 as we move towards a 2°C future. You can see that the total heat up is not so bad in the north as you get a little farther up in elevation, But there, you're still looking at significant increased warmth. We're talking about an additional 3 to 4 weeks of daytime temperatures over 95. I did some detail work on this, sifting through the different layers of data. You're looking at almost no additional days over 105 in Alabama. But this extended hot season you're talking about, which for the state on average is 30, closer to 40s in the hot patch, we're looking at a week to 10 days of that additional month of summer hitting over 100 degrees. Mobile, you've got the least to worry about with this increased heat threat. Montgomery, it looks particularly rough for you. I think you're going to get hit worst. Then Birmingham, and then Huntsville. Huntsville is a good step back in terms of daytime heat, only like 3 weeks of additional daytime heat, but you're still looking at more than a month of increased nights over 70, meaning this agricultural transition to hot season crops really statewide, it's going to have to take place if we want to keep yields up. And I think that there's more that this means too, beyond the agricultural implications. I don't assume that people are going to be scared of the heat in Alabama, and I hope that you're not getting that sense from the way I'm delivering this information. But if you're in an area where there's going to be another week over 100 and it's not going to cool off at night, you know as well as I do that that kind of heat takes a toll on the body. Air conditioning becomes especially important. People need to be able to cool off at night to recover from the heat during the day, especially in humid conditions like we tend to see in Alabama. People with heart and lung conditions, this heat is going to be difficult for them. It's also going to be a priority to protect old folks and little kids, the under 5 crowd, from this kind of extreme heat because it's just not good for their bodies. Concerned that this heat increase is going to translate into painful public health impacts in Alabama, especially with the costs for your state's energy transition looking pretty steep. Poor people, people who can't afford air conditioning or the energy costs for it, who can't afford to rest when it's hot, they're going to suffer from this additional heat. In that warm night island, especially, I'm particularly concerned about potentially fatal wet bulb temperatures. Building community resilience, focusing on providing emergency cooling is going to be really important for public health across Alabama. Let's get back into figure 2.11 and talk about the winter. You can see that there's a varying range of outcomes across the state where you're going to be losing close to 3 weeks in the north of winter, about 2 in this middle of the state, just a handful of days below freezing down in the south of the state, which is a reflection of the fact that you didn't have too many of those to begin with. So that tells you something about your change in winter duration, but I think that we need to look at change in winter intensity. What's going to actually happen to your winter lows? For that, we're going to look at figure 11.3, which gives us information about projected changes to plant hardiness zones. And you can see that this figure is also too big to be usable. So I'm going to transition over to a snip in a minute so that we can look at present day climate normals versus a sort of a 2C projection. I want you to see that 3C information is also readily available. All right, so looking in here on those snips, in terms of your winter low stability, honestly, this looks really good. You can see this small part of the state expecting no change. That should be good for trees. That's a point in their favor. Looks like that's right around Montgomery. Kind of a surprise there. Rest of the state, we're looking at mostly a 5 degree, some places a 10-degree lift in winter lows. Gulf Shores, that's some good news right there, and good news for Mobile, because we see this red forming up in that area. This redder color that was on the foot of Louisiana is now moving well up into Gulf Shores and Mobile. That's the edge of the coastal mangrove habitat, and that habitat, that ecosystem is what we really need to grow and flourish to protect our Gulf communities against hurricanes. That coastal mangrove habitat, that's going to help cut the storm surge to keep the storm surge from hurricanes being pushed really far inland. I love seeing some good news here for Mobile and for Gulf Shores because as we get towards sea level rise, there are some very interesting things happening in your state's very unusual coastal area. Alabama made a great decision to make sure that you kept Mobile Bay. That's for sure. But before we get to that, I want to get some more information for the rest of Alabama and look at your precipitation outlook. Here in 210 Alabama, I am extremely relieved to see that you are safely in the band of slightly increased overall precipitation. You all are probably aware of the wildfires that we saw in Louisiana recently, the terrible drought they've been suffering, and we can see on these maps here that Louisiana is projected to continue to flirt with drought in dangerous ways in these projections. But on that front, Alabama looks relatively safe. We see some more rain coming in, which we're going to need with that longer hot season. Let's see how the signals look for your state on the figure for extreme storms moving over to 2.12. And just at a glance, folks, I got to tell you, we are looking at a problem here. This is pretty upsetting news. We're seeing conserved pattern on all three maps falling over Alabama, showing a real deluge hotspot up here towards the north of the state. On the good news front, we're seeing islands of relative calm over Montgomery and over Mobile. In those paler patches there, we're only talking about like 10% max more rain in your big deluges, which I know is still a lot. But the rest of the state, we see these big, repeated, intense deluge patterns showing like 25% more rain per storm in a lot of the populated areas of the state. That's a serious sign of flooding risk. I would recommend, based on this outlook, which is one of the most intense deluge outlooks in the nation, extreme focus on wetlands restoration, on southern canebrake restoration in Alabama. River cane, that southern river cane, that's a plant that was all over this landscape. People pulled it out because it's pain to navigate a river that has cane in it or otherwise deal with cane. But it looks like we really need it again because we need to cultivate a landscape here that can deal with some serious water flowing through it. You know, the total increase in precipitation, it isn't bad. It's not like it's a problem in and of itself, but the fact that the whole increase in precipitation wants to come at these big lumps all at once, that is a problem. You may have noticed also, even the cities of Alabama that aren't getting directly hit by these deluge are downstream of cities that are getting directly hit by them. So the river flooding is going to impact folks throughout the state. So that stinks. Let's talk about sea level rise. There is going to be a really strong impact of sea level rise felt in the Gulf. It's going to be about the worst there in the US, especially towards Texas, is the unfortunate likelihood in the projections. You can see here in figure 9.2, the feds want us to be modeling 2 to 3 feet of rise as a minimum. But with the climate information coming in, it really looks like we might be heading towards a high end rise scenario. So we're going to model 3 feet and we're going to model 10 feet for Alabama. And I think you're going to like this actually, because there are two big things in Alabama's favor. So here we are in the NOAA Sea Level Rise Viewer. This is a great tool. You can enter your address. You can look at what's going to be expected to happen right where you are. And here's what's going on that's so good for Alabama. One, you were smart. Instead of having a lot of coastline like Florida does, you've just got a little bit of awesome coastline to deal with. A little bit less of a headache related to potential hurricane cleanup and sea level rise. Two, we're going to zoom in here. Look at how this coastline changes. At 2 to 3 feet, we start to see it moving in. But look at how stable it is there. Even at 10, extremely stable, extremely stable. Take a second and we're going to go back to the current mean high or high water mark. And I want you to notice that there are no other places. Look, this is like trying to be a port, but it can't handle it. Where we see stable coastline as we move towards 10 feet of sea level rise. I've spent a lot of time looking at this tool. This is the most stable emerging coastline that I'm seeing anywhere in the nation. It's pretty good over there on the west side of Mobile Bay, but to the east, really nice actually. Let's zoom in here. Let's zoom in at what's going on this emerging stable coastline. So we're zoomed here on the best part, current mean high or high water mark. This is not a coastline, this is a slough. We've got these little towns, Stockton, Axis, and Mount Vernon. At 3 feet at our lowest level of projected sea level rise, emerging oceanfront property, stable to 10, virtually no damage to housing stock. If I were a gambler who had a good availability to check in on some investments in Alabama, this area is going to be really banging no matter which climate scenario we go into. You folks have a great tourism industry by the Gulf in Alabama. You're really working to provide a safe, family-friendly environment. I went down there with my family to check out this emerging coastline, and I didn't have a lot of expectations. I'd never been there, but you folks blew me away. We had a wonderful time there. We had great family time. If you're interested in investing in the Gulf tourist industry, I would really look up there by Axis and Stockton, because I'm afraid we got to look at the bad part now. We got to go and look at Gulf shores now. So even at 3 feet of sea level rise, we're losing habitat we're losing some beach, but it doesn't look so bad. But at 10 feet, we're really losing the outer key. We're losing the beaches. We're losing a tremendous amount of beloved homes. We're losing a tremendous amount of very developed area. This is going to be quite terrible for the people and the economy of Gulf Shores if we see these higher end sea level rise scenarios. Moving inland a little bit, I want to show you the margins for our friends in Tillman's Corners. You can see that if we get only 2 to 3 feet, we have limited impacts on the housing stock. A lot of places people just love here, love to go stay, go out and fish. Beautiful place, incredible life in Mobile Bay. At 10 feet, you can see we're looking at a lot of land loss. There are some homes that are going to be less impacted. If you're in this area, folks, our friends in Tillman's Corner, put in your address and check it out. See if you need to make a change. Because I hope you're noticing as we look at this extreme sea level rise scenario that around Mobile Bay, particular to the east side of Mobile Bay, we're seeing relatively little infrastructure damage even in these high end rise scenarios. So it's not like we need to run away screaming from this area, but we will need to make some changes. Moving a little bit further up here, moving up to Mobile proper, we can see that again. At 3 feet, you are starting to see some pretty serious movement into these industrial areas. I mean, if you've driven around in here, right, you know that we could be looking at some big infrastructure problems because those bridges are not that high above the current mean high water mark. At 10 feet, we see serious infrastructure problems and we see serious potential for major polluting event into Mobile Bay. In a bay where there are currently rich, diverse marine life, where you can see dolphins, where you can see all kinds of fish, where you can see rays, thinking about protecting that life, which is going to continue to be rich and thriving if we protect it, makes us understand the importance of cleaning up industrial areas before we see these sea level rise scenarios. Because this could be okay. You have relatively mild warming in Mobile, and the vast majority of your housing stock is not going to be impacted very severely, even in these high rise scenarios. I'm extremely comforted that we don't see a lot of this green, patchy, marshy stuff appearing on either the west or the east bank. That's a feature that we notice in high level rise scenarios in Florida, where we expect a lot of contamination of the groundwater far inland. We're not seeing signs of that as bad in Alabama due to the special geography of Mobile Bay. This is a big lift here, looking at a high rise scenario over Mobile Bay. But it's a much better scenario than we see in the vast majority of the Gulf. It opens up more opportunity areas than any other place in the Gulf, and it destroys proportionally less infrastructure. I know it can be hard to see the type of destruction that we just looked at and see that as the good news. So I'm taking a second to come over here to Boston, Massachusetts. Just take 1 second with me and look at what's going to happen to this highly developed area in a 10-foot rise situation. We're seeing complete inundation of most of the developed area with big patches of incursion occurring well inland. This is the contrast, Mobile, that you should be considering. Compared to how FUBAR we're looking on most of the Gulf and the East Coast, Alabama, you do not look bad from a sea level rise perspective. This is all a real big problem. It's going to be a big, expensive mess. Regular people are going to get really hurt, even in Alabama. People are going to lose their homes and get nothing back unless they prepare now. Because this threat, it's real, but it's also not as bad for Alabama as it is for many coastal states, and you have a really unique advantage forming up with that stable new coastline. It's remarkably stable. If you're a gambler, you could start planning to make use of it now. I think it's the most interesting coastal change in the country there in Mobile Bay. I also want to let you know in the parts of Alabama that are modeled here in figure 7.4, which is the fire map from the 5th National Climate Assessment, we do see an increased risk of wildfire in Alabama, about a 2 times increase in risk of wildfire. Don't assume you're safe because you're not in the modeled area. I think with that long hot season, if you happen to get a drought, you could get a wildfire. That's the kind of thing that's worth keeping in mind when you make landscaping choices around your home. And I tell everyone, after the nationwide impacts of the 2023 Canada wildfires, you might as well get an air purifier for your home. They're not exactly cheap, but we got a bottom of the line model for $100. Works great for our small home. All right, folks, here's my call for Alabama. I wouldn't recommend it as a destination necessarily. Long term, I'm concerned about wet bulb temperatures, particularly in that warm night hotspot. But I don't think I'd freak out either. In my Arizona video, I told people I think I'd recommend most people consider if they should get out of the state. In Alabama, I would not make that call. I would check if you're going to be directly impacted by a high sea level rise scenario. I'd sell your place before too many people get tipped off and the property values drop. If you or a loved one have a health condition where you're going to be particularly impacted by the increased heat, you might want to think about moving. But for other folks, for the majority of residents of Alabama, there's a lot of resilience work to be done in this state. With your water outlook, you need wetlands restoration in a big way. And in your state, that's going to mean advocating for a return to river cane dominated landscapes, to traditional heritage landscapes for Alabama. You got challenges ahead, challenges with heat and with deluge. But there's work that can be done to get ready so that you can stay in your homes and continue to build a good future in your communities in your beautiful state. And some far seeing risk takers are going to clean up with that emerging stable coastline. I looked all around, there's no place like it. There's no place like what we see happening in Alabama as far as coastal sea level rise goes. In Alabama, I'm rooting for you all. Let's get ready. Folks, thanks so much for your support of American Resiliency. It's thanks to viewers like you who have contributed your energy, your money, your time that we are where we are today, which is off the runway and looking towards year 4 and 5. We're in the middle of a visioning process as we figure out what we want to do with the power that we've accumulated here with AR to figure out what climate information folks need, how to get it to them. If you want to be part of the visioning process, please get in touch. This is inclusive. We're seeking input from everyone in the community. And thanks again. Your involvement keeps this nonprofit going. If you want to give, you can find a donate tab at the top of our webpage or on the about page of our YouTube channel. Thanks so much and talk to you again soon.